Welcome back, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that networking session where we've had earlier the gender stereotypes are limiting the roles women play in supply chains, and that we are effectively actually locked out of supply chains, both in our own countries and at the global level. And COVID-19 has not even made it easier for us, it has made it worse. I mean, the numbers are staggering. Can you imagine 4.2% of women's employment was eliminated by COVID-19? That amounts to a drop of 54 million jobs. 54 million jobs. And of course, who is the most affected? It's the women, because we are less educated, we are not likely to be involved in jobs or businesses that allow us to work from home. So we're finding ourselves in a very bad situation. And therefore, I'm sure all of you will agree that we are all anxious to know how can we actually take advantage of the opportunities that the supply chains actually present to us. We have a very interesting group of women. I've already met them, and it looks like I've known them forever. And they are going to be talking to us this afternoon. I would like to take this opportunity to introduce each one of them, and then we shall dive into the discussion. I'm going to start with Heather Kipnis. She's a senior operations officer. Heather, maybe you can wave so that they know who I'm talking about. She's a global lead for entrepreneurship and inclusive business at the International Finance Corporation, which is part of the World Bank Group. And she has worked for the IFC for a whole 9 years. She's about to make 10, and has worked in the women's economic empowerment sphere since 2007. So she's really an activist and passionate about women issues. Nora, can you please wave to the audience? Nora Odreso is an accomplished senior executive with over 17 years leadership experience. She's currently a senior director of social impact in the Coca-Cola Foundation and leads the women's economic empowerment initiatives within the organization. It's not all about drinking Coca-Cola. There's a lot that Coca-Cola is doing for the women. You would be happy to do that. So next you buy Coke knowing that they're doing something for you. And then Nina, can you please wave? Nina Patel, all the way from India. It's getting late there, but we're quite happy to have you. She's the founder of Fresh Express India, growers and exporters of grapes, and they have been shipping their produce internationally since 1993, with a presence in the UK, the European Union, and Canada. Nina was a mentee on the Cherie Blair Foundation for Women in our flagship women's mentoring program in 2016. So we are quite excited to have all of you. Welcome to the panel. I would like to open by asking you, each one of you, to just summarize in a few minutes how you would explain the key issues for women entrepreneurs and supply chains, and how you or the program that you run are responding to this. I'd like to start with you, Nora. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Sarah. And it's really a pleasure to be in the midst of other distinguished panelists. It's really a pleasure to be part of this very important session because we are having very timely and critical conversations. There are several issues that women entrepreneurs in the supply chain face. 6, 7 issues, and underpinning all of these issues is the stereotyping of women. And I know that of the several sessions that we have attended, the stereotyping of women is one of the critical issues, and which leads to a big issue that we identified as we sought to start our women's economic empowerment program. The big issue that we identified was that women did not have adequate access. So I'll speak about one issue and what we sought to do to address it. A lot of the women that we came across that were already entrepreneurs had issues to do with limited restriction or restriction to accessing business skills training. And this is a big issue for women because as women are traditionally expected to be responsible for household and care duties, such as, child raising within the family, women will almost always have very limited available time to commit towards higher education and skills training opportunities. As I walked around and traveled around the world, and particularly in Africa, Middle East, women are seen as caregivers. And so this already makes it very difficult for them to start up thriving enterprises. And one particular example was in one country in Africa where I visited, and a woman entrepreneur was beginning to thrive, was beginning to grow her business. And according to her children were suffering. To them, to the society, she had abandoned her children. But for her husband, who would work late out in business, he was fending for the family. So a critical issue for women is we don't have access to business skills training, and if we do, it's limited. The intervention, therefore, that we sought to bring forward was to create short curricula for women to help them build their business skills, and in a way that they were able to do without, while they manage their daily lives, while they manage their families, while they manage their lifestyles. And the training program was divided into some basic entrepreneurial skills, planning a bit. How do you plan a business? How do you manage a business? And also how you access resources. So there are several issues, but that's the one thing that I would like to speak about.
Thank you very much, Nora. Nina.
Yes, Sarah. Like Nora, I would like to call out gender inequality and gender stereotypes. As naturally farm table grape exporters and sun-dried raisin farmer exporters, we ensure that women and men working on our, as well as our 500 plus small holding farmers we work with, are paid equal salaries for equal jobs. This was initially met with a lot of resistance by men and women, surprisingly, because they didn't think they deserve it. The women didn't think they deserve it, and men thought it as an insult. But with awareness programs and adult literacy programs that we had, that's what we have been able to achieve. For the same kind, for example, harvesting grapes, be it a man or a woman, they are paid equal salaries. That's how we are trying to bridge the gender equality and price parity. And also another thing, Fresh Express pays a premium to grapes brought from women farmers, so as to encourage the men to legally transfer some amount of cultivable land in the woman's name. Because as we all know, that women own only 2%, as Linda Scott in the previous broadcast said, women own only 2% of the land. And to improve these figures, this is something as a company we are trying to do. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Heather. Can I hear from you?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sarah. And it's such a delight to be here and contributing to this conversation alongside Nora and Nina. So yeah, I fully agree with both of the comments. And I think a key issue it boils down to is that overall women are severely underrepresented in supply chains. And I'll speak specifically to the procurement of goods and services from women entrepreneurs. I mean, the data we have shows that roughly less than 1% of the direct purchasing volume from large corporations and governments is going to women. Okay? Less than 1%. And aside from that's one angle of the underrepresentation, but that challenge that is fueled by two sides, by challenges women entrepreneurs face in terms of access, like Nora was mentioning, and Nina, access to resources, knowledge, training, also access to finance. But the other side of the coin is also amongst the companies, the corporations, and there are unconscious biases in the processes in terms of how procurement requirements are set for women, how women are recruited, how they're awarded. And so this plays out even if you look at where women are represented, they tend to aggregate in what's considered the smaller value contracts. So catering, cleaning, printing. And so And when we look at the pandemic, it's been an interesting ride because of lockdowns, a lot of companies have actually canceled these contracts for events and marketing because people haven't been in the office and there's been supply chain disruptions. So women entrepreneurs have been hit and affected disproportionately compared to male companies. And there is some silver lining here, because what we're also seeing in the pandemic is that these supply chain disruptions have alerted companies to the importance of making sure that they have a diversified supplier base. And so this is a great time. It's an opportunity for companies to buy more goods and services, particularly because we have the data and research shows that diversified supply chains contribute to business sustainability, resilience, and growth. And from IFC's perspective, we're trying to tackle this from two ways. One is through our investments in companies that are committed to closing gender gaps in their supply chains. A quick example is we invested in a poultry company alongside the Women's Entrepreneurship Finance Initiative. And this company aims to triple the percentage of female poultry suppliers in their value chain in Bangladesh, India, and Kenya. And so our investments are an innovative mechanism where we can incentivize and reward companies that are going the extra mile to make concrete commitments to buy goods and services from women. And lastly, I'll just highlight another way we're looking at this, and we'll talk more in the session on it, is companies need support. They need to be aware of what the business benefits are for diversity in their supply chains. And they need support to be able to find women entrepreneurs. And so we have a program called Sourcing to Equal, and it's a global program which aims to connect thousands of women entrepreneurs to contract opportunities by 2023. And we'll tell more about that. But it's an exciting time for us, and now is the time for us to address these challenges. Thank you.
Thank you very much all for setting the scene for our panel discussion this afternoon. Now, Nora, by the way, I wish to apologize. Nora is not from the Coca-Cola Foundation. She's from the Coca-Cola Company. Now, Nora, tell us about 5 by 20, why Coca-Cola started it and the goals and what the outcomes have been for women entrepreneurs.
Thank you, Sarah. So 5 by 20 is a global women's economic empowerment program that was announced by the Coca-Cola Company way back in 2010, in which the company set itself a target to enable the economic empowerment of 5 million women entrepreneurs across its value chain by the end of 2020. At that point in time, I believe we were one of the first private sector entities to have announced a goal of this magnitude. Now, 5 by 20 was birthed out of the acknowledgement by the company that women do represent the greatest untapped source of economic opportunity around the world. And indeed, as we read through a 2018 report by the IMF, we established that women's economic empowerment, according to that report, does boost productivity, and it increases economic diversification and income equality, as well as other positive outcomes. And many of us, I'm sure, may have come across this powerful statistic that women do control over $20 trillion in global annual spending. And very importantly, women also, for us as the Coca-Cola Company, women have a significant connection to our business and throughout our value chain, whether we are talking about women farmers, women distributors, women who own retail outlets, women recyclers, and also women who generally supply the goods and services that we as a company that we need. So these women, we found out, also faced significant barriers, a lot of the barriers, the stereotypes that we have already talked about, and these were preventing them from realizing their full potential. So we decided, let's identify which are the 3 critical factors that prevent women from unleashing their potential, and then worked with partners to seek to address these issues. And it is for all these reasons, along with the then UN's Millennium Development Goals in mind, that we chose to design 5 by 20 to address some of these challenges. And I would say, in terms of outcome, we're really proud to say we had a successful outcome. Obviously, challenges along the way, like with any other program, but our success came out of working with several diverse partners around the world. And we are proud to announce that having gone through this program, we were able to enable the economic empowerment of over 6 million women throughout the decade of achievement across 100 countries in which we operate.
Wow, that's a major, major impact. Deliberate, intentional targeting of women along your supply chains, Nora. What are some of the learnings? What do they mean for the corporate sector?
So thank you, Sarah. So there's a lot that we learned, and I will speak from our own experience and from the studies that we did. And one of the learnings for us is that including women in the supply chain for any private sector, for any entity, is good for business. So we're not arguing about inclusivity for the sake of arguing about inclusivity. It is good for business and it is good for society. We also learned that women entrepreneurs around the world face diverse challenges. So the intensity of these challenges is different and it varies from market to market. And what we then decided to do was to structure and tailor make our 5 by 20 programs to address the specific challenge, the specific barrier that was identified in a particular market. And in terms of being more specific, one of our most successful initiatives was a program that we established and implemented in the Philippines, which we call the Sari-Sari Training and Access to Resources, or the Sari-Sari STAR. STAR simply means store, training, and access to resources. And we found out through this program alone, as we undertook a study, we were able to equip over 200,000 women entrepreneurs who are operating micro enterprise neighborhood convenience stores, which in the Philippines, they call them sari-sari. And we were able to equip these women with gender sensitive business training skills. When we chose to do an in-depth study of this program's impact, we found out that 97% of the women that went through this program found the training useful for their business management. Their business revenues also increased by an average of 17%, and the store incomes on average increased by 12%. Their store inventory increased by 20%. And we also found out that nearly 70% of these women felt very confident about their future financial stability having gone through this program. So there's several studies that we have done across different markets, and across all of these studies, we are learning that it does make sense for business and society to invest in women's economic empowerment.
Thank you so much, Nora. Maybe next, can you just share with us what you think are some of the good practices that probably other corporations that may be participating in this meeting could pick from the Coca-Cola experience?
So a good practice, number one, first of all, I think it's very important, and I think Linda alluded to this. It's very important that as entities that we have a baseline, we establish a baseline study and determine who are in our supply chain, how many women are in our supply chain. One of the things that I would say, and this may sound very provocative, is that supply chains were designed by men. And supply chains were designed not necessarily for inclusivity, but they were designed for speed, they were designed for efficiency, they were designed for cost competitiveness. And the one thing that we need to do, if we are being deliberate and persistent, is that we undertake a full study of how our supply chain looks like and overlay the whole aspect of inclusivity, because we have established that economically empowering women is good for business and for society and contributes overall to economic growth. So we need to step back and relook at how we have designed our supply systems through the lens of inclusivity. We also need to work through what I would call a supplier diversity program, that deliberately supports women suppliers coming into our value chain. Also need to deliberately look at how it is that we build capacity. And I think one of the panelists I believe it was Heather, that said before that a lot of the work that women suppliers get, work in the hospitality area, whether it's catering, whether it's supply of food. How do we shift the needle, and how do we ensure that we're able to increase the spend, our procurement spend on women, and encouraging them to get into big businesses? I think capacity building is a big deal, and it needs to be harnessed by businesses that work with women in their supply chain.
Thank you so much, Nora. I know that I personally have always wanted to be a distributor of Coca-Cola. But as a woman entrepreneur, I could not access because of the amount of capital that was required to put up before I can become a distributor. So access to finance is one of the most cited challenges to women having greater participation within supply chains. So most women have to find themselves, again, selling the Coca-Cola products at the small corner shop, not being able to, to become major either district distributors or of large cities distributors because they don't have the finance. So how can we overcome this being such a challenge for women?
It's a big issue. It's a really big issue, and it's one of the blatant challenges that women face: access to finance to grow their business. And I think there are creative supply chain financing initiatives that as companies we are able to tap into. I mean, it's shocking. I recently came across a statistic that showed that 80% of women-owned businesses already. These are women running businesses, and they have credit needs like the ones you rightly speak about, Sarah. These needs are unserved and underserved, and in aggregate, according to a report, they're equivalent to a massive 1.7 trillion financing gap. And it's unfortunate that because of the stereotyping that we see, women have limited access to finance to start or to grow, to expand their businesses. I think that one of the biggest ways, one of the very impactful ways in which we can overcome this challenge is for financial institutions to begin to think outside the box. And firstly, acknowledge that women are a high value investment. We have a lot of evidence out there that shows that women are stronger savers than men. Women are more responsible borrowers, and they're more calculated risk takers. I think that it's important that as financial institutions that is issuing loans based on cash flow, looking at savings group histories. As women, we belong to several groups as well, looking at that, looking at mobile phone transactions, looking at tracking, recording of enterprise performance. So I would say it calls for a more creative and innovative approach from the lenders.
Thank you so much, Nora. I think Nora deserves a clap. She's done fantastic. Thank you, Nora. I'll be taking you on during the networking sessions on how I can actually realize my dream.
Sure.
Thank you, Nora. So now let's have Nina. Yeah, I would like to now, focus on Nina. Nina, as you have founded and established your business, Fresh Express, do the challenges that 5 by 20 was responding to resonate with you?
Absolutely, Sarah. I think that was, beautiful ideas by Nora. Thank you so much. As per ILO, we all know that women do 66% of the world's work. They receive only 10% of the income and own only 2% of the world's property and land, has already been mentioned. 95% of the workforce are women at Fresh Express, and we are fighting every day to ensure that these numbers change in favor of women. I've already given you the example of how we are trying to do innovative ways in which men would transfer. It's very difficult. We know that it is a patriarchal society and women don't have access. Women are not given ownership of land very easily. So there are different ways, innovative ways, as I already mentioned, on how we can give them incentive to the whole family when it is woman-owned land. We are also trying to increase their income with several. Not grape is a seasonal business, so if for 4 months they're covered, but the rest of the 8 months we have groups called Saki, which means a friend, and which we have life skills programs for them. So it could be in poultry, it could be in anything that they're interested in, not necessarily, again, gender stereotyping them into things like, only catering and tailoring and poultry, but other things that they might want to know about financial literacy, about cash accounting, so which helps them to be, self-sufficient women entrepreneurs. So these are the ways we are trying to improve these figures, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Nina. I know the food market is massive, especially organic food. And we know that most of our women entrepreneurs who are, based in developing countries, are actually growing organic food. And they would love, of course, to access the market just like you've been able to, Nina. How has it been for you, starting and growing your business?
Well, it has been a roller coaster ride for sure, Sarah. When talking about fair access to supply chains, I cannot help but mention how currently global trade is currently being held to ransom by outrageously inflated shipping freights, simply put, the cartelization of shipping lines. Of course, as small-holding farmer exporters, we are suffering the brunt as it's challenging to keep up with low yields due to climate change. As I already mentioned, we not only our own farms, but we work with 500 plus small farmers. So everything is done keeping them in mind, and rising production costs. So this is where indigenous, as you mentioned rightly, Sarah, natural farming plays a role. That's a little different from organic farming, if I may just, put in, is because organic farming, again, has expensive organic inputs, but natural farming plays a role to make agriculture commercially viable for small farmers. We use technologies like, for example, like biological brewing, and that's pretty interesting if anyone's made yogurt at home. So you have a starter and then you can multiply it, without corrupting the quality of the maximized amount. So whereby expensive biologicals can be multiplied by scientifically proven methods so as to make it accessible for small farmers. Biological pesticides made out of locally available plant extracts in association with leading research institutes have cut chemical sprays by 33%. And rising popularity, as Sarah said, of naturally farmed produce in domestic and closer markets in the East has been some of the ways we are trying to rise in challenges to the supply chain. Hopefully we don't die. Hopefully global trade does not die thanks to the shipping lines, and hopefully the governments wake up in time to save that. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Nina. And as you've navigated the corridors of power, which are mainly dominated by men, trying to grow your business, and trying to make sure that you reward the women as they should be rewarded, and trying to advocate for change with the policymakers and so on. What are some of the gender stereotypes that you have experienced in your journey?
Thankfully, Sarah, I think if we, in my personal case, I have been lucky to really stand up for, I think if we put it across, stand up for what we really strongly believe in. So whether it's men or women, if we have a product which is of quality and which adds value, it has helped. In fact, I would like to say, like, ironically, it has helped being a woman in a male-dominated profession. It's like even when I attend fresh produce, seminars, and Fruit Logistica Berlin is one of the largest one of them, and there are very few women. So I have used it to my advantage, where we have spoken for what we stand for, and it has helped. So Sarah, I would like to say that, if you put it across confidently, you can stand and get your point of view. It's just that you have to be able to put it across with that confidence.
Thank you so much, Nina. And maybe before I move on, I'd like to hear from you. What has been some of the challenges, accessing, being able to get the market of what it is that you are, you're trying to sell? I'm sure many women here on this platform would love to hear from you. And what are some of the challenges you've met while trying to access buyers from across the globe as a woman?
Oh, Sarah, I could write an essay on this, never-ending essay. Yeah. It has been, unfortunately, social certifications have been checklists to be ticked and to be framed, and not lived as we do every day as farmers and small suppliers. So that has been one of the biggest challenges when it comes to actually giving the contract. We small farmers are barely ever picked up by retailers because they want to be safe. They don't want to really take that risk. We're trying to do innovative things. We're giving a different product. We don't want to be picked up as we are woman owned. No, sorry. But we know that we have a product which is at par and is suitable for their, be it shelf life, be it taste. We are there with the other companies, but just because we may be smaller and not have as much access as the bigger organizations, we're sometimes ignored and put laid by the wayside. But just standing in there and not giving up, making sure that you are heard on amazing platforms like Cherie Blair Foundation and other foundations. Just stand up and speak and, well, shout out from the roofs if necessary till you're heard. It will make a difference one day. Don't give up.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Nina. I'm sure there's a lot more that we can learn from your experience. Now, Heather, I want to move on to you. And having listened to Nina's experience, how do you respond? How do you think gender stereotypes are perpetuated by private sector actors in their practices, especially when it comes to women's entrepreneurs' access to markets and supply chains?
Thank you so much, Sarah. And also thank you, Nina, for sharing part of your story. I think, one, I'm just inspired by it and the tenacity and determination. And more women entrepreneurs need to know about the Ninas of the world. And It's interesting. I read the report that the Cherie Blair Foundation has launched on gender stereotypes. And one of the things that struck me was the impact they have on the levels of self-esteem and confidence and just like one's own view of what you can achieve. And I think role models such as Nina are so important to help showcase that, yes, standing up, being confident, how you can do it, and to hear other women do it is what we need more of. And I would say the gender stereotypes that Nina's highlighted are absolutely what we have seen in our work. So we recently conducted a study in Kenya with over 570 small to medium-sized businesses, and about 60% of them were women-owned. And we also interviewed over a dozen companies. I'll call them buyers because those are companies that are procuring from small businesses. And there's two things that we learned, which are very much aligned with Nina's experience. One is that buyers really have a limited understanding of the unique challenges that women entrepreneurs face. And consequently, there is a perception that women entrepreneurs tend to have less capacity because they haven't been able to obtain access to finance. In some cases, it's getting certifications, depending on what sector you're in. They don't have all of the certifications that their male counterparts may have because they have limited access to information, limited access to mentors to help them navigate the series of requirements that need to happen. And so these perception that women don't have the capacity influences the award decisions. And so what happens is that women just are not able to access the procurement contracts. And I would say there are a few buyers that are aware of this though. And this came out of our research. And what's promising is those that are aware of it have champions internally. And from our research, we found that they were putting in place different mechanisms to try and give women entrepreneurs a chance to get their foot in the door. And some of those mechanisms are breaking the contracts into smaller amounts so that those requirements in terms of the thresholds and access to finance can be a little bit lower so that women can access them. And it's interesting. I think it speaks to Nina's point in terms of showing your value, being able to have an opportunity to show your product or service's value. And that requires getting a foot in the door. And I would also mention in terms of stereotypes, the systems, the procurement systems and policies that are set up, and this is to Nora's point earlier, are really set up for cost effectiveness and to reduce risk. And so they're set up to favor large and existing suppliers. And so, buyers tend to favor existing suppliers because the cost of assessing the capabilities of new suppliers and conducting due diligence is very high. So it's also a lack of the awareness of the business benefits to offset these costs of due diligence. And Nora's highlighted many of the business benefits, and everywhere from when you have a diverse supplier base, including women, the economics are there. It's diverse suppliers, they help reduce the risk. You've got a larger pool to tap into. This has become so apparent in the pandemic because of supply chain disruptions. Other benefits are in terms of quality and innovation. When we have more women entrepreneurs that are part of the system and also more diversified suppliers, you've got more competition. And so the businesses need to step up. They increase their quality to become more innovative with products and services that meet consumer needs. And then again, I would say having more women in the supply chain, also there's a tie to market share here. So in sense of brand recognition, increasingly we're seeing shareholders and customers, they want to know what's happening in the supply chains of the companies they invest in and then the companies they buy from. And making sure that women entrepreneurs are a part of it and have equal footing is really important to brand recognition.
Thank you so much, Heather. You remind me when I was at the Commonwealth, where I managed to change procurement rules to make sure that they ask every supplier to tell us what percentage of the people supplying products to the company are actually women or small enterprises. So I think there is something there that IFC can actually do in terms of the clients that you deal with to make sure that women are given. Like earlier on, they said, well, we need to be intentional. We cannot just wait for things to happen. Heather, can you talk about the demand side restraints from corporates? How can corporates respond so they can be more inclusive deliberately?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm gonna borrow some language from Nora. I loved this phrasing of designing for inclusion, because that's really what needs to happen within the buyers. I think oftentimes we're pinpointing the challenges that women entrepreneurs face, and there is this language around, okay, we need to fix the women entrepreneurs. But it's really, we need to actually look at the systems in place and fix those to make sure that they are more inclusive. So I'll take a step back and tell you what IFC is doing to address and highlight what some of the challenges are for the buyers. So we have this program, Sourcing to Equal Global, and the ambition is really to dismantle the barriers that women are facing and also the challenges buyers are facing to award contracts to women. And our first country pilot was just launched in Kenya in June. And what we're doing here is we're bringing together 10 leading buyers in the country and helping them make commitments, quantifiable commitments to source, to increase their sourcing from women entrepreneurs. And then we're working with them over 2 years to help them realize those commitments, alongside providing capacity building opportunities for women entrepreneurs, such as matchmaking, such as creating transparency in terms of what are the procurement requirements of buyers and how can we make sure women entrepreneurs are aware of those and know how to professionalize their business in ways that can meet those requirements. And then the third area we're looking at is access to finance. So Nora highlighted a lot of the great statistics around it and recommendations for some financial institutions. And access to finance is critical, working capital, so that women entrepreneurs have the cash in hand day to day to be able to operate and also manage the quality of their own supply chains to deliver goods and services. So I would say in terms of the buyers, there's several challenges that we're seeing. And first and foremost is buyers do not know where women are in their supply chains. So the data, there is just a complete lack of sex disaggregated data. And if you don't know where women are in your supplier base, you don't know where the gaps are, and you certainly cannot figure out what types of actions and initiatives to put in place in order to address potential biases in the supply chain. So that's one of the key challenges that we're seeing. I would also say that another key challenge is that oftentimes a lot of the initiatives to support diverse suppliers tend to be I want to call them a pet project. You've got these amazing champions in these organizations, but that are taking daily actions. Like I mentioned, trying to get smaller contracts. They'll give advice one-on-one to an women entrepreneur that didn't get a contract. These activities need to be systematized. There needs to be an allocation of resources, budget, and team members that are dedicated to diversifying the supply chain. And so a lot of companies don't have the business case internally to present this to their leadership to make the case for those resources. And so I think a lot of the research has been anecdotal on the business benefits. And so one of the things that we're doing is we've actually partnered with Accenture and We Connect International to conduct research and document what the business benefits are specific to sourcing from women, and how does that translate into benefits for procurement. And we'll be publishing that research in June, so stay tuned.
Wow, definitely I'm going to remain tuned. That is very much of interest to me. But we should also note that in developing countries, actually government is the major procurer of goods and services. And I know that in Kenya they've managed to put in place a law requiring that the women get a percentage of government procurement. I think the same should apply to many other countries. As much as we are looking to the private sector, also government, we need to advocate for changes within governments. Thank you so much for sharing that Sourcing to Equal. That's a very interesting program. I think we should be replicated in other countries, Heather. Now, more widely, can you explain what would be the benefits actually of unleashing the power of women entrepreneurs through the supply chains? I think you did mention one very important thing: the power of data, so that we know, every company knows where the women. But also for the women, I need them to appreciate the importance of access to information, because if you don't know, you don't know. I mean, you cannot take advantage of the opportunity. So we need to be very much alert as women entrepreneurs, network and find out where the opportunities are in the private sector, but also in the public sector. But, Heather, just share with us, what are the benefits of unleashing this power?
Yeah, I think we touched on it a little bit, but I would say there's kind of three categories of benefits. And this is really, when it comes down to it, it's not all do good, feel good. And I know Nora highlighted this. It really boils down to sustainability and to business benefits. So there's economic benefits. When we talk about procurement, I mean, if you talk to any procurement officer, their world is the decisions are made on lower costs and lower risks. And so, which is ever more important in terms of the pandemic. And so one of the benefits is reducing risk. You have more suppliers, you have more opportunities to be able to pivot, less chances for business disruptions, which also translates into better management of costs and a better return on procurement investments. There is some data out there that says supplier diversity programs actually provides 133% greater return on procurement investments. That's a very impressive statistic. So there's economic benefits right there. And then, I mean, I highlighted earlier brand recognition. Interestingly enough, Nora, I was reading a Harvard Business Review article, and it was around the benefits of supplier diversity programs, and Coca-Cola's program was highlighted. And what was so interesting, I found, was that there was a study done, and the consumers who were aware of Coca-Cola's supplier diversity program had said that they were more inclined to purchase Coca-Cola products. I mean, this is the benefit there. It ties directly to consumers. It ties directly to increased market share. It's an indirect benefit, but I don't think all of this hasn't been tied together. So when we think about supplier diversity, oftentimes it's seen as more of a social responsibility activity, but it really is a critical business element for companies to be able to build, basically rebuild from the pandemic, be more resilient and be more sustainable.
Thank you so much, Heva. That was a fantastic insights on what you're doing, and of course how gender stereotyping affects women's access to supply chains. Now I'd like to hear again from all of you. What do you believe is the role of the private sector in breaking down the gender gap in supply and procurement? Increasing market access for women-owned businesses. I'm sure many of the women participating in this are really anxious to know, how can we actually access this market that is out there? I would start with you, Nina.
Oh, sure, Sarah. I think the question is that, the role of the private sector corporates. So I would say an invitation to a mindset change, basically by retail chains and corporates. As I already said, to understand social certifications are actually lived every day by small suppliers and farmers. And I think a very important thing that has been covered by Heather and Nora also is to develop a minority supplier, you could call it a diversity or minority supplier portfolio. So whereby you can actually measure, what are the steps that are being taken. For example, what we do is that we measure every year the number of women farmers. So we are ensuring that we include diversity, be it women farmers, be it women suppliers, for packaging material, for all across the chain. So I think it's very important to develop a diversity supplier portfolio. And of course, training and mentoring programs like the Cherie Blair Foundation. And as Nora has said very well about the advantages of financial assistance to women, because they are more responsible borrowers and risk takers. So I would say that these are some of the things.
Thank you very much, Nina. Nora, over to you. What are your thoughts?
Thank you, Sarah. I'm responding with a great deal of energy because it feels to me that Nina as well as Heather have really, really inspired me and captured a lot of these solutions. I should be in a place where I'm taking a lot of notes and learning a lot from them. But I also do believe, just echoing Nina's point, the private sector does play a pivotal role in increasing market access to women-owned businesses. There's a number of ways, and I will speak from our own experience from the Coca-Cola company, that there's an opportunity, firstly, for private sector to establish, alluding to what Nina is saying, establishing supplier diversity functions. And Heather also spoke to this as well. Supplier diversity functions that increase the number of women-owned businesses in their respective supply chains. And they should have targets which seek to not only look at qualifying women entrepreneurs, but also deliberately enhancing or increasing spend from women-owned enterprises. And giving an example from what we are doing, our own program, the Coca-Cola company launched its own supplier diversity program way back in 2001. This was essentially first launched in the US, and then we began to globalize supplier diversity in 2005. At this point in time, we were focusing on some indigenous populations in Australia, in Canada, as well as in South Africa. And part of what this program was doing was to include efforts that were targeted at educating, as well as pre-qualifying minority and women-owned enterprises, giving them exposure to both inside and outside of the company, what it is that it took to become a Coca-Cola vendor. And much later on in 2020, we then made a commitment that we would spend at least $500 million over the next 5 years towards minority-owned business, supplying the companies. And several of these companies are women-owned. So that's one thing, to have a deliberate target-setting supplier diversity program. I would also say capacity building is a big issue. And in 2014, we as the Coca-Cola company launched a training program that was targeted at women-owned businesses. We called this the Supplier Trading and Empowerment Program, or in short, we could call it STEP. And the goal of this STEP program was to enable women-owned suppliers to stay competitive and to also help them grow their respective businesses. Not only the businesses that they had with us as a company, but other businesses that they had outside of the company. And we were able to train more than 40,000 women business owners. I would say also that private sector, because we have such a vast entrepreneurial ecosystem, we can develop creative finance programs and have benefits to these suppliers, such as early payment, benefits like reduced days of sale outstandings, infusing working capital, and providing access to alternative sources of financing and to liquidity. I also believe, and I think, Sarah, you mentioned this before, companies have an influence over their vast entrepreneurial ecosystems, and companies can make a choice to prefer suppliers and service providers that have a certain proportion of women in their leadership positions. A big one also in advocacy, and I think advocacy is a critical pillar that's been proposed by the Cherie Blair Foundation. Advocacy is a big pillar of influence, and I think companies can raise awareness about their commitment to advancing gender equality and inclusion in their supply chains, and they may well ask their business partners and their peers to respect and to encourage their partners to incorporate these commitments into their practices. I think that private sector companies can also encourage their partners to review the diversity of employees in their supplier operations, and also to gently nudge, or let me say, to admonish them to build targets across their supply chains. So there's a whole myriad of roles that we can play as private sector.
Thank you, Nora. Eva, any last thoughts on that?
Thank you so much, Sarah. And yeah, oh my gosh, I fully concur with all of the points that Nora and Nina mentioned. I think I would just add a couple of more in terms of what we have found from our research. So there are there are several differences in terms of the sectors and where women's representation is. And, I would encourage private sector companies and buyers that we're working with to tailor the capacity building solutions to the sectors, but also to take into account, we call it supplier status. Is a company targeting women as a direct supplier, or are there opportunities for subcontracting within the supply chain? What we found in Kenya was that women may not be represented on equal footing as men in terms of direct suppliers, but in some sectors such as agri, they were well represented as subcontractors. So there's a big opportunity to engage those subcontractors and support them with capacity building initiatives to potentially professionalize them in a way that they can be eligible for those larger direct contracts where they have more decision-making power. Another consideration for buyers is thinking about how they communicate what opportunities are for tenders for contracts. What we found in our research was super interesting. We found that male-owned businesses are actually leveraging their personal and business networks to identify contract opportunities, while women-owned businesses were looking at digital platforms and classified ads. But the reality is, buyers are not necessarily putting tenders in classified ads and digital platforms. So the private sector companies have a role to play to think about, where are women entrepreneurs accessing information, and can they bridge that gap and target channels where women entrepreneurs are. And I would say technology is such a major factor right now, and using existing digital platforms, finding entities. In Kenya, we partnered with Invest to Africa, and they have a platform that connects buyers and potential suppliers. And so buyers can go on these platforms and post their tenders. We Connect International is a global organization that's in over 100 countries. Women entrepreneurs can go on there and put their information up there so that buyers can find out about them and find them for opportunities. So those are just a couple of additional ideas and recommendations that the private sector can take to really increase procurement transparency and engage with women entrepreneurs directly.
Thank you so much, all of you, for those insights. But I also know, I've come to realize that gender is a very personal thing, that it always starts with us. And the minute you, as an individual, recognizes that there are differences, that people are affected differently, then even your behavior changes. And when you recognize you have a sister, you have a daughter, you learn to say, well, I need to be part of the people that are working towards equality. So as we wind up this, I'd love to hear from you. What are you pledging? What are you pledging? I personally, I want to, to be part of the group that will advocate and make sure that, we bring about policy changes. I want to be able to be part of the noisemakers whenever there are issues. I want to be at the front of the line whenever, we are talking to government. And then at the same time, I want to educate those who don't think that there's any difference, whether they be public companies or corporations, to be able to tell them that there is actually a difference. And if they study and look for it, they will find it, and then they will be able to find solutions. So tell me, what is your pledge tonight? Nina.
Yes, sure. My pledge is to walk the talk and lead by example. As I just said, I've been shouting from above the roofs till they hear, and just keep going, just getting up and keep going every time you fail. I saw the opening interview with Hillary Clinton, and it's really inspiring, and I can relate to that. I mean, as I said, it has been a roller coaster ride, but the important thing is to never give up and to just keep going, leading by example, because that's what's most needed today. You have to support and lead by example. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Heather.
So, ditto. I would say the reality of today's gender imbalance in supply chains is extremely concerning. And I think it's going to take the private sector and to make a concerted effort. And I would say we're trying to walk the talk. IFC is part of the World Bank Group. We have a commitment on businesses by 2023. It is not easy, but we're making progress. And I'm also convinced that everyone has a role to play. Everyone can affect change. And there's kind of three questions I think mostly companies should ask themselves. How many men and women are in the supplier base? Can we establish a baseline? Can we make a public commitment to show our intention? And key to this is partnerships. Can we put in partnerships in place that will provide the education, the mentoring, and help to identify eligible women-owned suppliers? Supply chains are so complex with so many actors, and we need each other. I mean, I think it's only through partnerships that we're going to be able to rebuild inclusive supply chains and open up new markets for women entrepreneurs.
Nora, you have the last word.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm sitting here full of energy and asking myself, what more can I add to the powerful calls to action that every one of you, every one of my fellow panelists have already talked about? Acknowledging that no one person, no one corporate can solve this problem on their own. This is an issue of serious magnitude, and I think we need to bring in our all. Personally, my pledge is to bring in all that I have, to be deliberate, to be concerted, to have the right level of emotional intelligence, and to be persistent as an individual, and also on behalf of private sector. And on behalf of private sector, I mean, several of us have signed up and we are signatories to what we call the UN Women's Empowerment Principles, which already provide us with a very clear framework for required action to build inclusivity. And Principle 5 in particular speaks about promoting women's empowerment within the supply chain, and it underscores the importance of directly addressing these measures that should be taken towards gender equality. And my particular call to action to all private sector: let's execute and enforce these principles and unleash women's potential.
Thank you so much, Nina, Heather, Nora. This is fantastic. I mean, I could sit at your feet and for the rest of the evening just learning from the three of you. But, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon and for offering us such valuable insights into building more resilient supply chains. I think there's a lot to learn. Personally, I've been going back to the recording and just taking notes and making sure that I learned from your experiences, and probably even visiting your website and getting more information about what you've been talking about. So I'm now going to hand over to two staff members of the Cherie Blair Foundation for Women as I let my panel go and allow them to enjoy the rest of the meeting. I'm going to be handing over to Elizabeth Wells and Hayley Matthews. Now, Elizabeth is the acting head of entrepreneurship at the Cherie Blair Foundation for Women. Since joining the foundation, Elizabeth has led the delivery of her venture and Road to Growth programs in Vietnam and Indonesia, as well as supported the rollout of programs in Guyana, Mexico, Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa. Hayley is Senior Partnership Manager at Cherie Blair Foundation for Women and leads on developing the foundation's partnerships with trusts, foundations, and institutions, and works across the foundation's geographies. Elizabeth and Hayley will be introducing us to the foundation's flagship business management program, Road to Growth, and explaining its impact. It's going to be very interesting for you who don't know what the Road to Growth program does. They're doing very interesting work, and they are really supporting so many women entrepreneurs, especially the so-called missing middle that is affected most, and where the women who are going to actually be part of the supply chain are likely to come from. So thank you very much, panelists. And I wish you a very interesting evening or morning or afternoon. Thank you so much. You've been brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Sarah, you've been wonderful.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.